As Nidhi told, I just would like to briefly tell what we do. We are based in Bangalore, Zumtor Biologics, and our R&D sector is in Bangalore, and our headquarters is in Boston. We mainly work on the immuno-oncology setup, and we are trying to find out novel molecular antibody against NK cell-based therapy. We are a VC invested firm. Till today, we have raised around 24 million, and next round of financing is currently going on. We are around 35 people in Bangalore, 25 in R&D. So this is our core team. You might know all of them. I think I know Ajit knows all of us, so that much I know. So myself and Dr. Mola takes care of the science. Kavita is the CEO, and Anirban is the CFO. And we have been, as you can understand, to run a company, we need to run like this kind of immuno-oncology setup and novel biologics. We need to be absolutely guided by scientific advisory board. So we have a quite experienced scientific advisory board with Professor Raghavan, and we have Naren, who was there for Biocon, and Amit, Pradeep, Dr. Anna, and Karthik. So, and we have also in the clinical advisory board by from Dr. Devasis and Dr. Stephen. So all together, they guide us how to take a new molecule going forward. So with this, I would like to go into my talk. The talk which I'm going to talk about is how to transition from biosimilar to novel biologics, and then the focus would be on monoclonal antibody. And briefly, I'm going to touch upon the target, the molecule, we are working on a little bit data. And this most of the slide which I'm going to present is mainly my view, not of the companies. So I think most of us, I do not need to explain here, most of us would know and the biologic or where from it started, the development of biologic, it goes back to 1890 when German Professor von Behring, who was the first one to talk about diphtheria toxin, that he could isolate it from the serum of horse and that could be given to patient as a drug. So that was the pharmacy of future, what he could envision at 1890, and he got the Nobel first time in medicine 1901. And from there we moved a lot. This is the complex molecule. I think I don't need to discuss, but you can clearly see that when we are talking about a large biologic molecule, they're highly complex, large in size, much more atom compared to any small molecule like aspirin and all those, which is hardly 2-digit atom. And when I'm talking about molecular antibody, which is the most complex, it is around 25,000. And so this is a cartoon of how we can talk about the complexity of the biological drugs. So what is a biosimilar? I think this has been discussed, I think, for last few days in this conference, but just to touch upon briefly that a biosimilar is a copy of a commercial available biopharmaceutical drug which is no longer patented by, which is no longer protected by patent. That is the crux of the matter, that the patent law should be expired of the biological drug, then only you can develop a biosimilar. And a biosimilar is highly similar. We cannot come, generally we do not have a absolutely similar to a reference product. We always call in biosimilar by definition that it is a highly similar to a reference product in physiochemical characteristic, efficacy, and safety. So to summarize, basically what you have a known DNA sequence which we cannot change it. You have a unique manufacturing. You have a unique biologic which we call it a very similar, highly similar to reference product. So how it starts? So generally we call it in the biosimilar guidelines that this the process is the product. So you cannot have the so you start with a gene sequence, then you insert into a vector, any mammalian expression vector. In case of microbiology, it is a microbial expression vector. Then you have your host choice of interest, whether it is a microbial or mammalian. Then you transfect the gene of interest into their system, and then you ferment it, whether it is a microbial fermentation, mammalian fermentation. You purify, you characterize. So we need to decide in this whole process, as it is used in living system, so you cannot have the exact copy as like in the small molecule case in the generic. So we call it is the process is the product, not the product per se. So which are the factor which influences the process? We need to remember it, that pH, temperature, culture media, and the oxygen level or the lactic acid level, they play a major role in case of the fermentation. And also in the downstream purification, we need to be absolutely certain that it is not only your protein of interest, but other protein which you are not intended, they should be removed. Like removal of host cell protein, DNA, fragment, aggregate plays a major role. And as I have told you, process is the product, but at the end product, it has to be characterized thoroughly. So we do spend a lot of time when we are developing any biosimilar in-depth analytical characterization. So we try to find out the primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and the sometimes quaternary structure also. We also need to find out how it kills. What is the mode of action? In case of biosimilar, we already know, but you need to do a lot of in vitro cell-based assay. We also remove the process and products related impurities. We need to find out the stability of the molecule, because the molecule has to, you can develop a molecule, but if molecule is not stable for long term during the clinical trial and all those, then becomes a challenge, right? So altogether, we spend, in case of biological development, biosimilar development, most of the times in analytically characterize the molecule. So how it is done? So you have a reference medicine, you characterize different lots of reference medicines before you start the biosimilar molecule. So you have a CQA, so critical quality attributes, and you generate the target product profile. Then when you have developed your own biosimilar molecule, every step you characterize your biosimilar in comparison to the reference medicine. So step one, as I mentioned here, it is a comparative quality studies, analytical and functional. Always we need to remember that we are comparing in response with respect to the reference medicine. Then when you have passed the comparative clinical studies, you go to non-clinical study where you compare with reference molecule with respect to pharmacodynamics and the toxicology. At the end, you carry out a comparative clinical trial. It is only the phase 3 clinical trial. You don't need to do any phase 1, phase 2. You look at the pharmacokinetics, PDA and PK marker, and also the efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity. That's the call. We try to define a term. I think all of my guests here, we all know, we call it a totality of evidence. So biosimilar, we need to remember, it is not a one comparison with reference molecule. We are looking into all totality of evidence. The regulator who is going through your dossier, they're trying to see that every step, whether it's the step 1, step 2, step 3, how it is similar or highly similar to the reference molecule, so that the biosimilar gets the approval, and we call it a totality of the evidence. So if you look into the current biosimilar scenario, this is most recent. It is mainly focused on the EU market, and also in the India, it is highly prevalent. We have several several biosimilar which is there already in the market. US is started, Latin America, Canada, and in the China, Japan region, Australia. So it is much more prevalent to know how good is the biosimilar, why it is required. Why it is required? This is a slide which is kind of old. I heard it in one of the presentation, that this is what is happening. Because of the biosimilar coming into the market, there are for the Remicade, this is the biosimilar for Remicade. The biosimilar is Remsima. The price of the innovator has come down drastically, and in case of Finland, 100% of the patient has been switched to biosimilar. Same thing for the Denmark, and France and UK. You are getting a high discount to develop the biosimilar. As a whole, 65% more patients are treated with biosimilar, and total cost has come down to by 60%. Again, this is a old data, not a recent data, but at least it gives a clue how the introduction of the biosimilar has revolutionized the biopharma industry. What happens? This is the European stuff. What happens to India? I think the similar projection you can see for rituximab, which was the first biosimilar which was developed by Dr. Reddy. There is a 80% price reduction over last 10 years, and we can clearly see that there are 300% increase in patient availability. So there is a definitely price drop, but still the accessibility, there is a question mark because of the price, which was said that there are at least less than 20% still can afford the Rituxan. But if we can see the price, the innovator price started with 50,000. Now you can have a biosimilar for the rituximab at 10,000. So again, this is old story. Maybe there will be a change, but this is the stuff which you would need to remember. What is the advantage of biosimilar? But there are some challenges when you are developing a biosimilar. I think we have some of my earlier speaker might have touched upon it, but I thought of just talking about this is what we call the major challenge, at least in US. This is called the patent dance. So there is a dance drama happening between innovator, the innovator who has developed the originator molecule, the innovator company, with the biosimilar company, that it has to go through a patent exchange process under BPCIA. So if any biosimilar files any application for its approval, they have to give their complete information to the innovator company within next 20 days. So it's not there in any other place, but in at least in US, which is the major market we are thinking about the biosimilar. That is a major challenge, that it has to go through a real 20 days, 60 days. So it's a pathway that you have to get the authorization or approval from the innovator company before you can develop or can market your biosimilar molecule into you can market the biosimilar molecule at in US, and that's the challenge, and that is called the patent dance. There is another term we all need to remember in case of biosimilar, which is delaying the introduction of the biosimilar to US market, is the evergreening of the patent. So I think we all know the Humira story. Humira story, it is ensuring that the Humira molecule, it was market exclusivity has ended in 2016, but because AbbVie has filed so many secondary patents, you can clearly see. So they have 14 formulation patent, 22 treatment patents, they have 24 manufacturing patent, which is ensuring that it is the product is protected till 2027, and they have several secondary patent which has ensured that it has been protected 2034. But this manufacturing process and secondary patent cannot stop the molecule to come to the market. But you need to see that though the market exclusivity of the Humira ends by 2016 in US, still US people cannot have any biosimilar into the US by not before 2022. Though there are so many biosimilar, Humira is there in the market already, but in US it is not possible to enter because of this evergreening of the patent. So these are the two major challenges from the IP, because I'm not getting into the regulatory, I know, and the product development challenges, those have been covered. But I thought it is good to know which are the IP challenges also. So one is the patent dance, and another is the evergreening of the patent. And with this brief background of biosimilar, let's look into some number. Again, this is kind of old number, is up till 2022, which was forecasted. 2022, which was forecasted that in the total 100% of biologic market expansion, this green line, this will be the proportion of the sale of biologics, and mainly these are sales of proportion of the off patent biologics. So this is coming from the biosimilar market, correct? But again, the 62% of it, there is it has been suggested that this is going to come with from the biosimilar, and then 23.2% of the 27% of the total market will come from the biologic or novel biologic space. So the companies who is developing is interested in either biosimilar or the novel biologics development, there is a market share which is there to go either for the biologics or for the biosimilar. That is the choice company makes, whether to go for the biologics development, novel biologics development, or the biosimilar development. So why should we do it? Means it is a decision of the company or decision of the individual company's evaluation whether to go for biosimilar or novel biologics. Because as you can understand, whether you are going to develop a biosimilar novel biologics, it is a complex, right? And there is a high chances of clinical trial failure, though your molecule is very similar. And the another challenges what is there in case of biosimilar is the interchangeability, because interchangeability exclusivity is a challenge still, and not many biosimilar in US have been considered as interchangeable. So the cost of developing biosimilar, if you want to have a interchangeable biosimilar, could approach the cost of developing a novel biologics. So this is which I feel that whether to develop a biosimilar or novel biologics, it will clearly depend on individual companies' evaluation whether to go for novel or biosimilar. There are advantage, disadvantage, as I could show them as I will show in the next few slides. But it is individual companies decision. So what are the major differences between biosimilar and originator? In case of target identification, the biosimilar, the target is already present because you are developing a biosimilar against a reference molecule. In case of originator, you are developing your own target. That means the IP belongs to you. That is a major advantage when we are developing of originator. We don't need to prove any similarity when we are developing a novel biologics. But in case of biosimilar, as I have shown you, it is always have to be shown in comparison with the reference molecule. Preclinical, we spend a lot of time when you are developing because you need to prove how it functions. So a lot of in vitro cell-based assay and toxicology in case of novel, which is not there in biosimilar. PK/PD studies is much more elaborate in case of biosimilar because you have to show no phase 1. So there is therefore PK and PD studies are much more elaborated in case of biosimilar, which is not in case of originator. There is no dose finding studies, no phase 2 dose finding study in case of biosimilar, and phase 3 studies in case of novel biology. It could be for all indication, but biosimilar you can carry out only for one indication, extrapolate the data, and get the approval for the other indication. So that is the advantage and disadvantage when you are talking about the differences between originator and biosimilar. If you look into the regulatory guidelines, what it talks about, the novel biologics will go through the 351A pathway in US, and in case of biosimilar, it will go to 351K pathway. So the challenges, as I told you, the 351A is a normal traditional approval process, but in 351K is a stepwise because every step you need to prove. And phase 3 clinical trial, though it is mentioned not mandatory, but generally every company carries out a phase 3 clinical trial. In case of novel, we need to do all the 3 phases of clinical trial, phase 1, 1, 2, 3. This is an indication-based clinical trial in case of novel, but in case of biosimilar, this is extrapolation. So to summarize, you spend a lot of time when you are developing by 351A pathway in case of clinical trial, but at the same time, when you are developing a biosimilar, your most of the time goes in the analytical characterization because you need to show that it is analytically, physically, by all means, it is close to reference molecule. This is a summary slide to show how it happens in case of biosimilar, that the analytic and process development, as I'm showing you here, you play a major role. You need to do structure and function analysis always in comparison, and non-clinical is similar kind of here, but your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 study is much more elaborated in case of originator or biological molecule, which is not there that much in case of biosimilar, but your characterization is a major player in case of biosimilar molecules. So now I'll switch my talk to the next part, which is monoclonal antibody. The last part of my talk will be focusing on the monoclonal antibody too. And I think most of us know the monoclonal antibody. Again, the idea of magic bullet was proposed by Paul Ehrlich, and he was the we think that he was the first one to postulate that it could be targeted a disease-causing organism, and it can be killed by delivering along with the agent of selectivity. So if you look into the monoclonal antibody history. So Emil von Behring, as I've told you, 1901, he was the first one to talk about biologics, and Paul Ehrlich, he 1908, he if you look into the history, he first talked about the production of the antibody. Kohler and Milstein, they told us how you can develop a monoclonal antibody in 1984, and then recently Tonegama got the structure of the Ig gene, and he also got the Nobel. So we all know how antibody looks like. We have two heavy chain, two light chain. They are around 150 kilodalton structure. Heavy chain and light chains are joined by disulfide linkage, both intrachain and interchain. The Fab region, which is there in case of both heavy and light chain, this part is required for your antigen binding and Fab. And this Fc portion, which is there in the CH1, CH2, CH3 domain, they are required how it is going to function, how it is going to kill the target cells. So this is mainly the antibody structure, and so this is the antigen variable region, binding variable region, and this is the constant domain. And so this is the hybridoma technology. As I told, in 1984, Milstein and Kohler talked about it, how you can develop an antibody using, so the mouse was challenged with antigen, the spleen cells were isolated, they are mixed with the myeloma cells, and so myeloma cells gives like continuous generation. It was fused and hybridomas were developed. This hybridoma was selected by using in the hat media, whichever could grow in the hypoxanthine aminoterium thymidine media. Those are the positive, and they were harvested and used for monoclonal antibody. So this is the this was the beginning way to develop how you can develop a monoclonal antibody. And the B cells, as I told you, so this was as myeloma cell is giving this is the immortal, and so this produces specific antibody structure. But there are several challenges using this hybridoma technology, because as it was produced using the mouse system, so HAMA response, like anti-mouse, human anti-mouse response was a major immune response. We had a challenges with murine antibody because it was getting cleared from the antibody very rapidly. And as you can understand, so you need to isolate the B cell, mix with the myeloma cells, and fuse them, grow into the hat media. So it was kind of time consuming and laborious. And so, and this fused human lymphocyte mouse myeloma cells were very kind of unstable. So the three disadvantage of using hybridoma was HAMA response, loss of effector function, and reduced antibody diversity. So how we can overcome the challenges of using hybridoma, but we all could understand that we need to develop antibodies. So what are the different ways? Then we came up across making different antibody library. As you have small molecule library, so people started developing antibody library cone, like naive library, where the B cells was isolated from the donor, and then you create the Fab or SCAP molecule of the naive. You could synthesize the different varieties, different design the synthesis of the Fab or SC region of the Fab region, and you can have the design on that is called the synthetic library. You can put together naive and semi-synthetic and combine a semi-synthetic library, and also you could design an immune library from the immune donor and have an immune library. So that means these libraries have all the antibody Fab sequence or a SCAB sequence where you can screen against any target gene, and you could isolate your antibody of interest. So this is the way nowadays most of the antibodies are being developed, and as they are of the human origin, so the loss of the immunogenicity percentage and immunogenicity goes down quite a bit. So most of the molecule which is currently being developed and which is being in the market is being used by either from the naive or the synthetic library. But as you can understand, this has to be, because you have to screen against it, right? It has to come to a surface. So there are different display technology which we are using nowadays to display all this library, either using phage, yeast, mammalian, or ribosome. So there are advantage, disadvantage of all kind of display. I have listed here a few of them. Phage display is the very well established and is the simplest selection method and can be used for the complex. But the disadvantage is the phage is a prokaryote. So then the companies have started developing the yeast display. So it does not require any post-translation modification. But the challenges here, the number of clones, positive clones could be much less than the fudge. So companies have developed their own technology, whether to use fudge or yeast, and display the library and screen against it. Now I'll briefly move to the business part of the monoclonal antibody and why it is so important and how it is playing globally, how the market looks like, and what we should know, and how we can make it more accessible or affordable to others. So if you can clearly see the first monoclonal antibody, which was developed in 1975, the first mAb, and the first the first antibody, which was Muromonab, which was developed in 1986. It came into the market. It was the mouse antibody. Now it is not there anymore. And now we are talking about around 300 monoclonal antibody, much more than that, which is there in the market. And you can clearly see every year there is an exponential growth of monoclonal antibody development, and market is huge. And so like every year now, I think there are 150 monoclonal antibody which has been approved in 2019. So this market is the going for the future. And recently FDA has approved the, I think there was a talk, I think in first few days of this session, the FDA has approved the 100th monoclonal antibody in May 2021, which was the GlaxoSmithKline PD-1 blocker dostarlimab. And you can see that how monoclonal antibody is getting approved, like when we started in 1986, and now in 15 years where we have reached. So most of these are the blue diagram, which is the general monoclonal antibody. There are some ADC, bispecific, and all those, but mainly there is an exponential growth of development of monoclonal antibody against all kind of target or diseases. And if you look into the market share, what has been projected, that the market will be around by 2023, it will be around 218 billion. It is growing at 12.5% CAGR. And it's not only your classical monoclonal antibody, it covers the conjugated mAb or bispecific, CAR-T, ADC, and all those. So altogether, it has been projected that the total market share will be around 218 billion. But we all need to understand that the monoclonal antibody accessibility or affordability is mainly in the high income countries, which is like 77% of the total monoclonal antibody market. The share is coming from the Canada, US, and the Europe region. India, Middle East, Africa, Latin America is very poor. And you can see that number of antibodies which has been registered in the lower and income group countries like Zimbabwe, Nigeria, India is much more less than what is there in EU and US. So, but the good part is if you look into the top 10, 20 prescription drugs, including small molecule and biopharma, I think 9 out of top 20 is from the monoclonal antibody side only. The leader is Humira, then followed by Keytruda, which is an anti-PD-L blocker. You have Eylea, which is not a monoclonal antibody, but is again also a biological drugs. You have Avastin, Opdivo, Rituxan. You have Herceptin. So most of the top selling drugs putting together pharma and biopharma is coming from the monoclonal antibodies too. This is what has been shown here, that Humira itself is giving you 19 billion market share, and then you have Stelara, Keytruda, Opdivo, Avastin, Rituxan, Herceptin together. So these are the mainly mAb which is giving rise to the top 10 drugs in global sales in 2019. And it is also been noted that the monoclonal antibodies are the single largest class of biosimilar biologic molecules undergoing clinical investigation globally. And how mAb therapy has impacted the life. This is the data of the pembrolizumab, which is for non-small NCLC. So before the pembrolizumab came into the market, the overall survival was around 50%. With the introduction of the pembrolizumab, there is a significant increase in the overall survival, both in the percentage and also the month-wise. Similar thing has been reported for rheumatoid arthritis, RA. Before the biological drugs which came into the market. You can clearly see it was being treated with DMRD. It was effective in reducing the joint inflammation, the DMRD one, the small molecule drugs, but it was limited to the treating the symptom, not going to the why it is happening. But now with the advent of Humira, Remicade or etanercept, we are trying to find out the source of inflammation, which prevents the irreversible joint damage and making disease remission quite possible. So those are you can clearly see the benefit. We all know it. I'm just trying to highlight it. But we know that is the future lies with the biological drugs, whether it is a monoclonal antibody or any other therapeutic protein. But as I've shown you, like though it is biological drugs are there, monoclonal antibody is curing a quite lot of population, but access to monoclonal antibody product is predominantly restricted to high income countries. And this imbalance is preventing the vast majority of the world population from benefiting to get the benefit of monoclonal antibody treatment. And as more and more maps, as you can clearly see, there is 100 monoclonal antibody which is approved. It is like to grow this imbalance is like to grow more and more as more antibodies enter to the market. So what we can do to make a monoclonal antibody globally accessible? These are two things which I thought that I'll touch upon here. And beside going to the technical challenges and all those, we all know it. But what are the two stuff we can think of it so that monoclonal antibody becomes more accessible? So we need to look into two aspects. One is the availability, another is the affordability. How we can make monoclonal antibody more available and how we can make it affordable. So if you look into more availability of the part, I think the challenges are in the regulatory scape, because as you can see here, a lot of hairpins when you were driving into any mountain region. Similarly, regulatory challenges are like every step you take, there will be a turn or bend. One thing, just one slide, if you look into here, we all know there is a specific guidelines, much more transparent, much more focused guideline to approve monoclonal antibodies there in maybe in the EU, US or in India too. But in case of lower income group like Zimbabwe, South Africa, is still not there, right? We do not have it. So we have to think of, if you look into this structure, look into the Keytruda, or take an example of Enbrel. Enbrel, it was available in EUS by 1998. The regulatory approval of Enbrel came in South Africa by 2004. So there was a 6 years of delay getting the approval of Enbrel etanercept compared to the income group like US compared to South Africa. So for most of the drug, that is the challenges. You look into the Keytruda, pembrolizumab, which is really a much like everybody is going after it, right? I have shown you the data for NSCLC, how it is benefiting the patient. In US, it was approved in 2014, but it took 2 to 3 years of time to get the approval in India, Egypt, and all those. So this is the challenge. Because of the regulatory differences in different countries, the molecule will not be approved at the same time. So if you can think of harmonization of regulatory guidelines all across, then you can imagine as soon as it is approved in one jurisdiction, the same molecule can be approved in another jurisdiction at the same time. So that means patients have the availability to get the medicine if they can afford it. So as I have shown you, so harmonization of the regulatory pathway is one of the way to accomplish this. And we all understood that regulatory requirements are often unclear or even undefined in lower medium income countries, and variations in the requirement across various regulatory bodies increases the cost, time, and complexity of the biopharma players to submit to the regulatory review. Now, how we can make it more affordable? So one was the availability. We have thought about it. We know what is the challenges and we can work on it, but how you make it more affordable? So if you look at the cost of MAP therapy for 1 year treatment in case of oncology, it is 142K USD. We can imagine, it's like, I don't know how many of us can afford this kind of therapy. So it is highly expensive drugs of treatment. The another level of complexity arises because the health coverage in UK or in US, the healthcare system covers sometimes the monoclonal antibody treatment, but it's not the same case in case of either India or lower income countries. So there is lower middle income countries, it is not, your health coverage system does not cover all it. So that becomes another level of how many people can afford it. So what is the advantage nowadays? People are talking about it, advancement, how you can make it more delivery, if you can make it. There are several things, there are several work is happening in the delivery of the monoclonal antibody. Therefore, maybe you need low dose so that the cost of the treatment comes down. There are a few of the advancements which I've noted it down here, like large volume subcutaneous delivery, large volume by or on-body infuser. So these are the work which is going on to lower down the requirement, so the cost comes down. But another thing we need to, and another stuff which has been discussed, if you can make it a local production and local access, then by that means also the cost of the monoclonal antibody development can come down, because if you compare between US, the cost of developing any molecule in the Indian CMO to US CMO, obviously it will be much cheaper here, and the cost of treatment can be also reduced in this part of the countries. So Gary, who was the CSO of Sanofi, he nicely put it out here that improvement in MAB potency and reduced manufacturing cost would reduce the dosage and frequency of the administration, thereby leading to the decreased cost and improved convenience, which I was just talking about. So there are 2 points we need to summarize. The goal one, to increase the availability of the MABs in low and middle income countries, and the second point is to make more affordable in low and middle income countries by defining process changes, or make it more accessible by the doing some new delivery system, or develop the molecule locally. Now I go to the last part of my talk, which we are trying to do. It is the immuno-oncology, and which Zumutor is invested and Zumutor is trying to do. I'll be showing some data which we have developed. As we all know, immuno-oncology is becoming an emerging field to revolutionize the cancer treatment. So now what we are trying to work, not the antigen which is expressed on the cancer cells, but we are working on the target which is expressed on the immune cells, like T cells, NK cells, macrophage, or the tumor cells, and there is a receptor binding, we are trying to block it here. So there are several of those immuno checkpoint inhibitor which we all know, PD-1, PD-L1, CTL4. These are the already molecules are already there in the market. So we are trying to also develop one of them here. And you can see that every company, you name them, they have so many active immuno-oncology agent, whether it is a small molecule or biosimilar, all of them, by BMS, LG, Novartis, every single pharma, biopharma companies are investing in developing something for in immuno-oncology checkpoint inhibitor. We, as a Zumutor, when we started working on it, we also thought that there is no point being a biosimilar company, because we cannot be one of them, right? We may be one of them. So we thought of developing something novel. We have started developing novel monoclonal antibody therapy using, we have our own display, we have our own knife library and synthetic library. We have fudge display, yeast display. We do everything in-house. So these are the three molecule which we are currently developing. ZM008, which is much more advanced, and we are planning for IND submission by end of this year or early next year. And we have, as I told you, we have two different kind of platform. One is Enabler, which is antibody discovery platform on based of library and yeast and fudge display. We have also a glycoengineering platform where we modify the ADCC function of the antibody structure. So this is the advanced one, ZM008. Before we started working on this molecule, we first checked for its expression on various cancer by doing TCGA database analysis, and we could clearly see that most of the cases our gene of interest was highly expressed. The same thing we carried out in different cell line. In-depth immunofluorescence assay we did, and a lot of high-end microscopy to see how it is expression in different cell line of prostate cancer, liver, glioma, ovarian, breast, and we could clearly see that it was overexpressed in most of the cancer. We focused on our target area as a prostate. As you can understand, there are not of drugs available for the CRPC patient. So our target of interest is a prostate cancer. That is what we are going against right now. But there are several other indications this molecule can be used for. We carried out a cytotoxicity assay because, as you can see, it is an immuno-oncology drug. So either you need the PBMC or you isolate the NK cells from the PBMC and see how it is killing. So we have carried out in the PC3 cell line with our molecule. You can see when you put PC3 cells, NK cells, and our molecule, the increase of cytotoxicity compared to the negative where is only PC3 and NK cells. And you can see in the fourth quadrant, there is number of fluorescence is much more high. And so this is just to show that it goes through NK cells based killing, and it is killing the PC3 cell lines as it is supposed to do. We have carried out an in vivo xenograft mice model in Hunog mice, where we have transplanted the PC3 cell line in the Hunog mice and then let it develop for some times, and then you inject your drug, and you can see there is a TGI of around 49% reduction in the tumor growth inhibition compared to the vehicle control cell line, which was a antibody which is control IgG. And so it shows that your molecule is working the way it should work, and it is killing the tumor cell lines. There is a constant reduction in the TGI, and we have also looked into the we have done tissue cross section. We could clearly see there is infiltration of the CD8 positive T cells and the NK cells into the site of injection. We have also, I do not have the data. We also have carried out cynomolgus toxicity study, a non-GLP. We are initiating the GLP toxicity right now, and we clearly see that it is non-toxic. We are also done a lot of immunohistochemistry in the tissue patient sample to see how it is human tissue microarray system, to see how it is expressed. So with all this data, we are looking for submitting the IND by late 2021 or early 2022. And this is the last slide of how antibody business is going to pan out. So you would have the naked antibody as like we are developing, like ZM008, which kills any target cells by either ADCC or CDC mechanism. You can increase the efficacy of the monoclonal antibody there by playing with the glycan structure here in the 297 position of the antibody with asparagine. The Foucault is attached to it. You can increase the efficacy by playing here. You can have a ADC where you can conjugate your small molecule with your drug, and thereby killing the potency, increasing the potency and killing the target cells. You have immunoliposome, you have ribonucleotide, you can develop bispecific antibody. That is another field which people have started investing into it, where you target two different antigen at the same time by two different Fab with CD19 and any one of your interest. And you, as you all know, you can have the CAR T cells also, where you are modifying the T cells with a CFB and thereby killing the target cells. So antibody therapy is the future. We all know it. We all have started investing on it. We all started working on it, and I think more and more new molecule will come into this field, which will improve the patient population. At the same time, we also need to remember that we need to make it more affordable, more accessible, and more available. And thanks all of you. Thanks for your attention, and it was great talking to all of you. If there is any query, I would be happy to listen to you.
Thank you so much.